Hi, everyone. Today we have Cohen from Northeastern University, and he's going to talk about his recent work, Byzantine Agreement with Polylog bits per party. Let's welcome him.
Thanks for having me. And this is, as I said, this is a talk about Byzantine Agreement, where we don't have, each party speaks a little bit. This is joint work with Elet Boyle and Arushi Goel. And one of the, before I start talking, just I want to emphasize that if you have any question at any point, please ask. Don't worry about interrupting me in the middle or anything. I'm much happier with interactive talk. So any question that you have, anything that is unclear, simply go ahead and ask it. Okay, so I'll start with kind of a very, very quick overview of kind of the question. If there's anything unclear, let me know. So the talk is about Byzantine Agreement, right? We have a set of parties, each one has an input bit, and they want to agree on one of their inputs. Normally, it's modeled using two properties. The first one is agreement. That means that when some of the participants may be corrupted and attack the execution, we want that all honest parties will still output the same bit. The second is validity, that says that if everyone, all honest, start with the same input bit, this will be the output. And so each one of these properties on its own is very easy to achieve. To get agreement, everybody simply outputs 0. To get validity, everybody simply outputs its own bit, its own input. But getting both properties together has been a very, very rich field of research in the last 40 years, give or take. Byzantine Agreement is a very simple problem to state, but it's a very powerful primitive. And you can find it in many other applications, like other consensus type primitives, like broadcast and blockchain protocols, and also in secure multi-party computation. Essentially, whenever you have a protocol that has to be robust against cheaters, where at the end, you want that all of the participants, honest participants, will agree on the output, we have Byzantine Agreement hiding there in the background. So the question that we look at during this talk is, what is the communication complexity of Byzantine Agreement? Right, and as a function of the number of parties. So the communication complexity means the number of bits that we have to send throughout the protocol. We can think of it as how many total bits are being sent, but also how many bits each individual in the protocol sends. Kind of as an example, during this talk, probably I will do most of the talking, but in average, everyone will speak a little bit. So we also want to look at the per party communication. And as a simplifying notation that I will use in the upcoming few slides, I'm gonna hide polynomial factors that are in the security parameter kappa, and also polylog factors in the number of parties. This will be the O tilde notation. So anything till now, any question? I'm gonna now just.
What's K here?
Kappa is the security parameter, the cryptographic security parameter.
Okay.
Great. I'm gonna just, before stating what we do, gonna give a very brief overview of history. A very partial overview, but trying to kind of show the main advances that we had. And I'm gonna focus on the setting of where we have a constant fraction of cheaters. So the bound on the number of corrupted parties is any constant less than a third of the parties. Let's say 0.3 of the parties can cheat. Some of the protocols can achieve more than that, but this will be the setting I will focus on. So going back to the beginning, in the early days, the seminal works of Shostak, Lamport, and Peace gave the definition of the question, and they gave the first feasibility and infeasibility results. But the feasibility results required exponential communication per party. Shortly after, there was a lower bound that showed that we cannot go below quadratic communication. Every party must send linear number of bits if we want to get, if we're using deterministic protocols. So if we don't use randomness, this is kind of the best we can do. A bit after that, there were the first protocols that had polynomial communication. At the beginning, they used cryptography in a setting with a private key, public key infrastructure and signatures. And about a decade after, there were two works that kind of at the same time managed to get optimal communication complexity for deterministic protocols. So there are many other works that I'm not mentioning here, but this is kind of the evolution of the first generation of protocols. Those protocols were essentially every party talked to everybody, or every party talked to a linear set of other parties. And those protocols were either information theoretic, or they used very basic crypto, say signatures. And that was the state of the art for a while in terms of communication complexity. In 2006, roughly, there was a new observation that we can use randomness to go around this lower bound of Dolev and Raichuk. And in 2009 was the first Byzantine agreement that had subquadratic communication complexity. These are the works of King and Saya. So at the beginning, they were not balanced. So there were some parties who had to talk a lot, but shortly after, they also had a balanced version where every party had only to send roughly square root 10 bits during the protocol's execution. So the total communication was subquadratic. In that family of protocols, there was also another version that managed to get to better total communication complexity, where throughout the protocol, with the number of bits to send was almost linear, O tilde of n. And these protocols were also not balanced, so the total communication was very good, but still some parties had to talk a lot. So you can see in the first set of protocols, we had better per party communication, and later on we had better total communication. And so in those family of protocols, all of them didn't use crypto, they were information theoretic, and they didn't get perfect security. They had statistical error. And during this time roughly, we had a big bang of the blockchain era. And there we had a few works that started using more modern cryptography. And those works normally used a trusted PKI, where we had the trusted party who generates the keys for the participants, as opposed to each one choosing its own key. And they used more advanced primitives like verifiable random functions and so on. And with those protocols, we could tolerate stronger adversaries. We could tolerate adaptive corruptions. And we also got very good total communication complexity. We can see, though, that the per-party communication in those more modern protocols is still much higher than the one we had in King and Saya. So we can see here kind of a gap. If we want to optimize the total communication, we can do it. But then we have some individuals that have to talk a lot. If you want to optimize the per-party communication, then the total communication is suboptimal. So we have here kind of a gap, and this is where we started thinking whether we can somehow get the best of both. We're greedy. Can we get good total communication, but still have a good per-party guarantees? And in fact, this is something that was asked in this work from 2009 of King and Sea, whether we can use cryptography to go below this square root 10 per party barrier. Okay, so before moving forward, kind of this is a very, very quick view or review of history. So I just want to make sure that everyone's on board. Okay, so we have this gap, and the main result that we have here is actually that we managed to answer this question in the affirmative. We can use cryptography to get a Byzantine agreement where every party sends the number of bits it sends is only polylogarithmic in the number of the parties participating in the protocol. So we get good per party communication, and which implies good total communication. We actually show two protocols achieving it with a trade-off between the cryptographic assumptions that we need and the setup assumptions that we use. So if we use a strong setup assumption where we have a trusted party generating the keys, then all we need is signatures. All we need is one-way functions. If we use the bare PKI model where each one chooses its own keys, then we need much stronger crypto. We need snarks, we need succinct non-interactive arguments with efficient extraction. I'll talk about it later on, and hash functions. The setting in which we get those results is, again, as we said, we have a constant fraction of corrupted parties, constant less than a third, and we only can deal with static corruptions. So by static, I mean that first we have the setup of the protocol. We get the PKI or the CRS or whatever setup information that is needed. And then we have a corruption phase. So the corruption can be based on the setup, but once the protocol begins, there are no more corruptions. And if we have the corruption before the setup, then we have trivial solutions to this question. Again, we also consider synchronous communication. So the protocol proceeds in a round structure. Other results that we have show barriers of the approach that we use to construct these protocols. And at a very high level, we showed that we must have a setup with private coin, like a PKI, where it's not only a common reference string, but we have also secrets during the setup phase. And we also need crypto. We need one-way functions for the approach that we use to answer this question. And as we said, in the bare PKI model, we rely on snarks, which is kind of a nasty assumption. It's a non-falsifiable assumption. And we show evidence that natural constructions in this model require similar assumptions. Again, those things that I'll go over a bit more in details later, but this is kind of the high overview of what we achieve in this work. We show two constructions with the trade-off between crypto and setup assumptions, and we also show some barriers of the techniques that we use. Okay, and I'm gonna just kind of do a quick recap of the first introductory section before we move on further. So again, when we want to overcome this quadratic barrier for Byzantine agreement, there were two approaches that have been used in the literature so far. The first one, used by King and Saya and others, is that everybody speaks during the protocol, but everyone only talks to a few other parties. And here we can get better per-party communication, but suboptimal total communication. And we don't need crypto or setup assumptions for this approach. The second approach that is kind of came in the blockchain era by Algorand and Abraham et al. We have only a few parties who talk, but whoever is speaking speaks to everyone. And here we get better total communication, but the per party load is higher. And we use stronger setup assumption and stronger crypto for those approaches. If we look back at the first approach, there was a work of Boyle, Goldwasser, and Tesaro from 2013 that showed that we can actually do something better here. If we throw crypto on top of this approach, then we can get what they called polylog locality. That means that every party only needs to speak to a polylogarithmic number of neighbors. But we don't have many communication links, but each communication link here has to be large. It must have a lot of bandwidth because the messages in this approach were larger. So every party sends at least a linear number of bits. Okay, so again, pause to see that if there's anything unclear before we move on. That we kind of showed the two approaches, we show what each approach gets, and this is actually going to be the starting point of our construction. So what we're going to do next is, this is kind of the agenda for the talk, the layout. I want to first go over this idea from BGT that got polylog locality and to pinpoint the reason for the high communication requirements. And then we're gonna define a new type of distributed signature that can be used to shrink the communication complexity of the protocol. We're gonna talk about the two ways of realizing them and mention the limitations of the approach. And so that's the plan for the remaining of the talk. So the approach of BGT follows like everything in life can be split into three parts. The first part is reaching almost everywhere agreement. That is agreement of almost all of the parties. This is a notion that already came in the 80s. And the idea here is that the adversary can choose a set of parties to corrupt, and it cannot prevent the vast majority of the honest parties from reaching agreement. But what the adversary can do is isolate a few of the parties, a sublinear, a sub-constant fraction of the parties, and make sure that they are not in agreement with the rest. Okay, so the adversary can split the parties into a large set that is in agreement and a small set of isolated parties. And this is the protocol from 2006 of King et al. And this protocol really has almost all of the properties we need. The round complexity is polylogarithmic. The locality, the number of neighbors for each party, is polylogarithmic. And also the communication, the number of bits each party sends is polylogarithmic. Further, this is in the so-called full information model. No setup, no crypto. Right? It's kind of one of these magical protocols that really has very, very nice properties. The second part in the BGT construction, this is not exactly, you won't find it in their paper, but it's a small adjustment of the protocol to this setting, is that the large set that is in agreement generates a certificate. And using this certificate, they can convince isolated parties about the output. So this part requires some form of a PKI, because you can think of the certificate as a form of a signature, and the parties that are isolated will need to verify the signature using the PKI setup. So here, the round complexity and the locality don't grow, but the certificate is large. So the communication per party grows a lot. Okay, so first, we reached almost everywhere agreement. Second part is getting a certificate along with the agreed upon value. The third part is to convince the isolated parties. So the parties that are in agreement send the certificate to the parties that are isolated. I don't know if you've seen this animation now. It took me like an hour to make it work, so I'll do it again. You can see how the red changes to green. Isolated parties are all now in agreement with the rest. Now, of course, that the parties that are in agreement don't know who's isolated and who's not, who's cheating. So what they do is they do it in kind of a distributed way. Each party sends the certificate only to Polylog other parties. It chooses a random set and sends the certificate to this set. And the good thing is that we cover everyone with very high probability. Okay, so these are the 3 steps of the BGT protocol. They focused on MPC. This is kind of, we distilled their idea for Byzantine Agreement. Before moving on to what we actually do, I want to focus a bit more on the second part here. How do we get almost everywhere, and what is the certificate that is constructed here? Because this is really the essence for the larger communication. Okay, so again, good time to stop if there's anything that is unclear.
Wait, sorry, quick question.
Yeah. Sure.
So I'm guessing you can't get half because here you don't get half fault tolerance either, or I guess.
Excellent question. You have now given a quick pick to my open question slide. So we do know how to get subquadratic communication with 1/2 minus epsilon corruption. This is the paper of Abraham et al. And Elaine is also there. And we know how to get a constant fraction less than 1/2, but we don't, doesn't have good per party communication, because this is in the second approach. We have a few parties who talk to everyone. In the per party setting, I don't know how to get anything better. And to get the optimal resiliency of T less than n/2 is a great open question. That's a very good point.
Hey, Ron, this is Juan.
Hey.
I missed
Hi.
the beginning, but do you talk at any point about the size of the abandoned guys, or isolated guys?
So in this approach of King et al., the guarantee is that the size of the isolated parties is sublinear. It's roughly n over log n.
Okay. That's not the almost everywhere agreement situation, right?
In what sense?
Oh, you're talking about the cryptographic setting, or?
So the KSSV approach is information theoretic. This is for, they don't need setup. Even
Okay.
with setup, I don't see any
uh,
limitation, but this is currently the.
No, but the information theoretic setting, as I recall, tolerating a number of whatever isolated guys.
Yeah.
You know, without you know, same meaning if you have like T, right, capital T, big corrupted, you know, malicious parties, then getting OT, abandoned guys, right? Is it known to how to do in polynomial time? Oh, okay. The other thing I didn't catch was, are you talking about any kind of graphs of some, polylog degree, right? I see.
Yes, so everyone can talk to everyone.
Yeah. All right, so I'll take it back. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, no worries. Okay, so just as a recap, we've just about to show how the KSSV approach works. So maybe things will also be a bit clearer in a few minutes. Okay, so zooming in to this almost everywhere construction. The main idea in PGT or following KSSV is that the vast majority of the parties agree on some committee. We have a committee election process. And we have here the green dots. These represent the n parties. And we want that most of them will agree on a polylog size committee and also have a reliable path from each party to this committee. And the way to do it is to construct an overlay network. So this is, it will be in the form of a tree. We have a tree structure where each node will correspond to some committee of parties, a randomly chosen set of parties, or pseudo-randomly chosen in a way. The properties of this communication tree are as follows. The depth is logarithmic. So from root to leaves of the tree, it's a logarithmic depth. The connection between the parties and the leaves is using this expander-like construction where we have the guarantees are that we have polylog parties assigned to each leaf, and every party is assigned to a polylog number of leaves. That's all. It's kind of a bipartite random graph that with the right parameters, it has a very nice mixing structure. So we have the connection between the parties and the leaves of the graph is deterministic, is known. The adversary knows this connection. But later on, I won't go into the actual construction. We can have tournaments between each level and the next. So in each node in this tree, we have an assigned committee of polylog many parties. And the guarantees from these constructions are that in every layer of the graph, the vast majority of the nodes is good. So what do I mean by a good node? The adversary knows the structure. It knows the connection between the nodes and the leaves, and it also knows the structure of the tree. The adversary can choose a set of parties to corrupt, 1/3 - epsilon parties to corrupt. And when he corrupts the parties, he can make sure that it has certain nodes where there will be a majority of bad parties. But it can only do it in a few nodes. And the guarantee is, we say that a node is good if more than 2/3 of the participants are honest, and bad if at least a third are cheating. So in every layer, the vast majority of the nodes are good. And further, the root is going to be good with overwhelming probability in this case. And from most of the parties, from almost all of the parties, there is a good path between the party and the root. So the parties that correspond to this root will be the committee that is elected. And we can say that if we look at this party, one path hits a bad node, but we have another path that goes on only through good nodes. So the guarantee is that if this party sends some message up the tree, it will arrive to the root. And if the committee in the root is sending a message down the tree, it will arrive to this party. But for a small fraction of the parties, every path they choose from the party hits a bad node on the way. So those parties are isolated. They don't necessarily get messages from the root, and messages they send may get blocked. So the adversary controls the communication those parties see. Okay, so this is kind of an overlay communication network that the nodes in this communication tree are committees of parties, and it has very nice properties. That goes back to this work from 2006. The second part in the BGT protocol was to generate a certified almost everywhere agreement. Right? So here we have a PKI setting, and the idea adjusted to Byzantine agreement is that the root committee can run a Byzantine agreement between themselves. And this can be an communication inefficient protocol because we only have Polylog many parties. Once they reach agreement, they send this value y down the tree. Okay, so we know that almost all honest parties will receive y. Next, each party that receives y signs it using some signature scheme and sends the signature up the tree. The committee, the root committee now gets all of those signatures, combines them together into a large certificate, and sends this certificate down the tree. So almost all parties now hold this big certificate. And using this certificate, they can now do the third part of sending it to a random Polylog set of parties, and the guarantee is that we will reach agreement with overwhelming probability now. So we're almost done here because every party only talks to a Polylog many other parties, and most of the messages are short, except for this large certificate. So the main question now, what we need to kind of answer the question, get a communication efficient Byzantine agreement per party, is to shrink the size of those certificates. If we can do that, we answer the question. Okay, so kind of reduced the problem of Byzantine agreement with Polylog bits per party to generating these small certificates. And this is exactly this notion of succinctly reconstructed distributed signatures. Okay, so again, just to remind exactly what we want to do here, the goal of the certificate is to convince a set of isolated parties that there is a value, and the majority of the parties accept this value as the output. Okay, we want the size of the certificate to be small, to be polylog in the number of parties times some polynomial in the security parameter. And we also want the generation of this certificate to be efficient, to communication efficient per party. So we want that when we generate it, each party will only send polylog many bits. Now, when I thought about it like that, I was convinced that we have solved the question. We have so many types of signatures. Surely one of them answers the question. All of these are real types of signatures. They did kind of a 5-minute search in Google, and all of those exist and have a meaning and a different meaning, even though some of them I think are conflicting meaning, like deniable signatures and undeniable signatures. So we have signatures is really one of those topics that have been studied a lot. And I thought that all we need to do is to find the right signature, but we couldn't. And let me explain why. And I'll focus on the two main natural candidates, multi-signatures and threshold signatures. So what are multi-signatures? These are kind of a signature scheme where we can combine n basic signatures into one compact multi-signature and allow the verifier to verify it. And the size of the compact multi-signature is independent of how many signers we had. I think of like a group element. So this is good. This is the size of the certificate now is independent of the number of parties who actually signed. So that looks promising. And we can also do the aggregation in batches, in small batches. So we can aggregate a bunch of signatures at a time in a way that doesn't blow up the communication during the process. So actually, I thought that was done. That was it. That's all that was needed. That using multi-signatures in BGT does the trick. Actually, BGT used multi-signatures in their construction, so there is something missing here. And can anyone see what it is? If anyone knows multi-signatures? There's one thing here that ruins everything. So even though the size of the signature of the multi-signature itself is compact, it is not enough for the verification. In order to verify, we also need to know who signed. The verification must get the list of parties who signed the multi-signature in order to verify. And this information costs in communication. So we have here a linear number of signers because the adversary controls the linear number of cheaters. So we must have a linear number of parties who signed. So just this information, if we have 1 bit per signer, it's already a linear size message. This is the source in BGT for the larger communication. Okay, so multi-signatures turn out not to solve the question. So how about threshold signatures? At here, we have shares of signatures and we combine them into one signature. And the size of this signature is small and we don't need to know who signed it. We don't care who signed it because just the ability to reconstruct proves that there were many signers. So that answers this problem that we had. But now, in order to reconstruct the threshold signatures, we need to know who signed. So the problem is now in the reconstruction part. Think of Shamir sharing. Then when we start reconstructing up the tree, just to know the Lagrange coefficients, I need to know who's participating. So multi-signatures and threshold signatures, each one almost does it, but for a different reason is not sufficient. And by the way, this is not just something in the definition of threshold signatures, it's also in all of the construction that we looked at, none of them had this compact reconstruction that we need here. So unfortunately, we had to come up with the new notion of distributed signatures.
Wait, sorry, do you mind another question?
Sure, definitely. I'm happy with questions.
How come we can't just like elect a committee of people to generate the certificate and then
Great
do
question.
this Polylog neighbor broadcast thing?
So the problem is that the adversary controls also a linear number of sets. And you can say, hey, this is the set of the elected set. The set that was elected to choose the value. And you can send the isolated parties the set from this committee. So unless the isolated parties know who the committee should be, the adversary can cheat in that case. So we must certify that actually many agreed on this committee. And
like a VRF is out of the question here or something like that.
So VRF would mean that it's actually one of the first solution follows this path. So I think that's exactly one of the approaches we wanted. What if we use a VRF? Actually, we don't need a VRF. We can deal with something much simpler. So let's see. Just gonna recap what this new notion is, and we'll talk about the two approaches of constructing it. Okay, so we have a setting with a PKI. Each party has a private sign-in key and a public verification key. Everybody can sign the message using its sign-in key. And we can aggregate signatures together into a kind of an aggregated signature, but we can do it in small batches and recursively up the tree. We want that the aggregated signatures remain succinct, remain of polylog size. And when we verify, so to verify, we have all of the N verification keys and this succinct aggregated signature, and we can be convinced that a majority of the parties actually contributed. So this aggregated signature contains information from a majority of the more than n/2 signatures. But the difference to multi-signatures is that we don't know who signed. Okay, the requirements are that we have robustness, so the honest parties will be able to generate this aggregated signature. And so they will be able to convince the isolated parties. Unforgeability means that the adversary will not be able to forge one. So it will not be able to convince the isolated parties on a different value. And succinctness means that during the entire process, no party sends more than polylog many bits, polylog time poly kappa. So this is the new notion of signatures. And we have two ways to realize them. And the main difference is it's kind of following these two approaches. The first approach uses a strong setup, like in the VRF setting, where we have a trusted party who generates keys. So can have this nice trusted party. It chooses a pair of keys for every party, gives each party its sign-in key, and publishes on a bulletin board the set of verification keys. And this is really following this approach to the blockchain era type of protocols for subquadratic communication. And all we need here is signatures as an assumption. And it's we need signatures because we kind of look at a one-shot thing. If we need to repeat the process, then it will be VRFs. The second setting is of a bare PKI, and here every party chooses its own keys, its own sign-in key and verification key, and it puts the verification key on the bulletin board. And the malicious parties can see honest keys when they choose their own keys. And now we need much stronger cryptographic primitives. Okay, so the first construction, as you said, it's very intuitive. Once we have a trusted party who generates the keys for us, then it can simply choose a pair of keys for every party, but only give the sign-in key to that party with some probability polylog n over n. So with overwhelming probability, only the number of parties we'll be able to sign is polylogarithmic. And in that case, the aggregation procedure will simply be concatenation of signatures. Okay, so there's nothing too deep in this construction. It's really ideas we had in the past. Just one thing to note about it is that we don't need correlated randomness here. So it's really a PKI in the sense that the trusted party samples keys for each party from a product distribution. Right, so the keys are completely independent. Another thing is that if we don't, we can have signatures that have this oblivious key generation property where a party can sample a verification key without knowing the sign-in key. And then we can think that it's even a local process. If parties are honest and run the key generation honestly, then we can proceed. So it's slightly weaker than a full-blown trusted party. But these are kind of minor things. The main essence is if we have a trusted party who generates the keys, we can answer the question very easily. The more interesting part is when we don't have such a trusted party. So how can we use their PKI and signatures to answer the question? And this, I think, is more interesting. So let's start with a toy example. Right, let's say that all of the nodes are good and follow what they need to do. So we start with the setting where we have almost every agreement, but we have some cheaters. And every party can simply sign the value and send it to a leaf node. Right, so in this case, this leaf node had 4 honest parties. They all signed the same value. We can think of isolated parties as cheaters here. It's the same. So it has 2 cheaters. They can combine forces and sign a different message. Right, and this is the same thing for all of the other leaf nodes. Now, every leaf node counts how many signatures it sees on every message and sends the counters to its parents. So the parents can combine the counters and send it up to their own parents. And at the end, the root will know how many parties signed on each message. So it can see that M is the right message. But this is the core idea, but it only works if parties act honestly. What can a cheater do? So if we have a bad node, it can lie, right? It can simply come up with a different number and say, hey, 20 parties sign this value, and then the root will be confused. So the idea here is that we need to somehow enforce an honest behavior. And this is really kind of a classical MPC technique. We want to make sure that the nodes operate honestly. But we need to do it in a succinct way without blowing up the communication. Right, so following the ideas going back to GMW, we use a zero knowledge proof. So more specifically, we use a SNARK, a succinct non-interactive argument of knowledge. This is a setting where we have a prover and a verifier, and the prover proves that it knows some witness to some statement. But the size of the proof, so this is the succinct part, the size of the proof is very, very small. It's non-interactive, so it's a one message, and it's an argument of knowledge in the sense that if the verifier is convinced about the validity of the statement, we have an extractor machine that can interact with the prover and extract the witness from the prover. So this is the tool that we're going to use. And now the idea is that at the beginning, every party signs the message and sends it to the leaf. The leaf nodes count how many signatures they see on every message and send it to their parents. And they also add the proof that they know the underlying signatures that correspond to these counters. Each node that receives these counters and proofs can combine the counters, send it up to its own parent, and add a proof that it knows proofs that there are underlying signatures that sign those messages. And we do it like that recursively. Here we have 3 levels. So after 3 phases, the root will know that it has a message with the majority of parties who signed it, and he has a proof for knowing a proof for knowing a proof for knowing the signatures on those messages. Because this is a recursive composition of snarks. And it has a name, it's a proof carrying data system of Kiasa and Tomer. They came up with this notion in 2010. Okay, so this is really the high level idea of this second approach of getting those succinct signatures in the Bear PKI model. Just there are some obstacles. So we need the recursive composition for log many levels. And we know to do that if the extractor that is guaranteed in the proof system is linear in the size of the prover. So we need very efficient extraction because when we have this recursive composition, the size blows up very quickly. The size of the extractor. A second challenge is that if we look at the bad node here, then the adversary controls a linear number of cheaters. So it can create a signature that has a linear number of valid signatures. So it can create a proof from a linear number of signatures on some value. And this would be a valid proof, right? Because the signatures are valid. So the real construction is a bit more involved. And for example, we need to prove that the signatures correspond to this part of the subtree that from which the proof came. So there are many small things we have to deal with, but this is really the high level idea. How much time do I have left?
Roughly 5 to 10 minutes.
Okay, perfect. So those were the 2 constructions of the signatures. One had a strong setup and weak crypto. One had weak setup and strong crypto. And we wanted to see if we can do better. Right? We're always greedy with those things. Do we need those things, those strong assumptions? So we showed something a bit more generic than that. In the barriers, we focused on in our construction, we had this almost everywhere agreement part, and we boosted it up to everywhere agreement in 1 round. At the last part where we send the certificate, it's only 1 round. And here we relied on both PKI and on crypto. So do we really need those assumptions? The first lower bound that we show is that we need some form of private coin setup. Okay, so we need either a PKI or correlated randomness. And formally, if we have a way to move from almost everywhere agreement to everywhere agreement in one round, and we only operate in the common reference string model, then there must be a party that sends theta n, that even talks to theta n other parties. It sends theta n messages. So we cannot do it with the sublinear communication per party. So some form of private coin setup is needed here. The second lower bound shows that if we have a PKI model where we have a kind of a product distribution, even if it's a trusted PKI, then we must have crypto. Because intuitively, if we have a PKI, but we don't have one-way functions, the adversary can invert the function that generated the PKI and get privileges of the keys. So if we don't have one-way function, and we have such a one-round protocol from almost everywhere agreement to everywhere agreement in the PKI setting, then again, there is a party that has to talk to a linear number of neighbors. So these are kind of the two lower bounds. The second lower bounds, by the way, doesn't apply to the setting of correlated randomness. And we have constructions where we have information theoretic protocols boosting from almost everywhere to everywhere, that where every party only talks to a polylog other parties, to sublinear other parties. So the second lower bound really relies on the set that it's a product distribution, a PKI. Another barrier that we try to overcome is, how shall I say it? Multi-signatures almost solve the problem, right? Signatures kind of, multi-signatures prove that there is a large set of signers on a message. The problem is that we need to send this list of signers. So if we can only shrink this list of signers, then we get what we want. We get those succinctly reconstructed distributed signatures. So first we try to throw snarks on the thing, and then this led to the second construction where we realized we don't need to start with the multisig. We can start with any type of signatures. But can we do it without snarks? That was another direction that we explored, and we showed that it is unlikely. We didn't give a full-blown proof that it is impossible, but we showed evidence. And just to illustrate why, so if we look at, we want falsifiable assumptions, so we looked at multi-signatures that are in the standard model without random oracles. And there is this scheme of Lu et al. And here, I won't go into details, but we have a set of verification keys and verification keys. And when we sign the message, we get the signature sigma and the list of signers L. And when we verify, we simply take this subset of keys corresponding to L, multiply them together, and we get the verification key for this signature. And what we showed is that if we take this scheme, if we can construct some form of SRDS from this scheme in a natural way, we define what a natural way is, but we don't send the list L, then essentially we can solve the subset product problem. Or we get, or more formally, we get a succinct argument system with average case hardness to the subset product problem, which is an NP-complete problem. And we almost hit the lower bound of Gentry Weeks that shows that that separated snarks for NP-complete problems from any falsifiable assumption. So here we only get average case hardness. So we view it as a strong evidence that we can now do it, but it's not a proof. It's an argument in a way. So I think this is an interesting direction, but that leads me to the summary and open question. So we showed two protocols for Byzantine agreement where every party only sends Polylog many bits. One is in the strong setup with only required signatures. The other is in a weaker bare PKI setup in a CRS, and then we need snarks and hash functions. We showed two lower bounds that some form of private coin setup, and if it's a PKI, then crypto are needed. And we also kind of showed these barriers that if you want to construct these things from multi-signatures, then it looks like we need, or it is likely that we need snark-like tools. But there are many open questions here, many follow-up questions that we can think of. So the first immediate question is, can we get those succinct signatures in the bare PKI model from falsifiable assumptions? We don't rule it out. We don't have a proof we cannot, so maybe we can. Another one is that all of our lower bounds only hold for a one-round protocol from almost everywhere to everywhere. And can we get Byzantine agreement with Polylog bits per party unconditionally? If we have more interaction, maybe we can do it without crypto. Another question is that our technique is really for static corruptions. I mean, once we know who the committee of the root are, the adversary can corrupt them. So there are ways King's have a way to deal with adaptive corruptions, but they don't keep this slow communication that we want. So that's another question. Can we deal with adaptive corruptions? What about asynchronous communication? We know how to get good at total communication, but not good per party, sublinear per party communication. So it's also open. And as we mentioned before, we don't know of any subquadratic Byzantine agreement protocol that has the optimal resiliency of T less than N over 2. I think this is really interesting to see whether it's inherent or whether we can actually achieve it. Okay, so I'll conclude here, and thank you very much for listening.
So Ron, I missed the beginning again. So what was the resiliency bound?
So we deal with 1/3 minus epsilon.
I see. Same as
fraction of corruption.
Same as the BGT thing, right?
Yeah, I have a feeling that we can push it to 1/2 minus epsilon, but we need to open the box of KSSV for that.
Another question.
Yeah.
I guess another thing would be to do a simulation-based proof, right?
So we have a simulation-based proof for the construction. Yeah, we realize the Byzantine agreement functionality.
But how
not
do you
on the
model?
properties.
How do you model the isolated guys?
Oh, so the almost everywhere, it's we let the adversary choose who's isolated in the ideal model. So the adversary really has a lot of ability on choosing the communication patterns in this tree and who's isolated in the honest parties. We abstract away the construction of KSSV into a functionality.
The construction of what construction?
Okay. King et al. For the almost everywhere Byzantine agreement from 2006.
Okay, because there are some issues, at least for MPC and for that case, but we can talk about that later.
Yeah, definitely. Byzantine agreement makes everything much simpler.
Finally, what you're doing in the first construction is effectively building a Erdos-Renyi graph, right?
In the first level.
This polylog over log assignment.
Oh, yeah. That's a way of looking at it. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Great talk.
Thanks.
Maybe I can borrow your slides at some point. And
Pleasure.
I'm joking. Great, nice talk.
Thanks.
Wait, so what's the main barrier from, I guess, slow communication Byzantine agreements to MPC?
Privacy.
I see.
Privacy of the inputs. So in the BGT construction, for example, the way they dealt with MPC is that once the committee of the root is chosen, they generate an encryption key, distributed a threshold encryption, send the key to almost everyone, or to everyone using they have a way to get the full agreement. And then each party signs encrypts its input using this key, and they send it back to the committee. So the committee gets information of everyone. Then they run an MPC to decrypt and get the output. But with MPC, I think there's an inherent barrier that you must have certain parties that have a lot of communication. You cannot get a balanced communication MPC with a small communication.
And why do you think this is inherent? Is it because like there's some interactivity and statefulness that you need, or?
No, there's a paper from ICAL 18, I think, of I think it's Abhishek Jain and Elet Boyle and others that showed that even with semi-honest, you must have at least one party that has linear communication, if I remember correct. I don't remember the details, but there is some barrier there.
Oh, it's fascinating. Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Sorry, one more question. What did you mean by one round boost?
So that we have almost everywhere agreement, and then after one round, we have everywhere agreement.
I thought the construction you showed had this tree, which doesn't look like one round, or is that one round? I might have misinterpreted.
Yeah, this is in the part that I didn't show with the tree. Going back. So there is this, I showed it in the 3 parts of BGT. The 3rd part was sending the certificate. But in that part, once we had almost everywhere agreement, all we need to do is send the certificate to the isolated parties.
Also, the certificate is generated as part of the almost everywhere agreement process.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Almost all of the parties have the certificate, and now they have one round in which they deliver the certificate to a small random set of parties.
I see. I understand. Thank you.
Sure. No, that's great. I'm much happier with questions.
Okay, so if there are no other questions, let's thank Ran again. That's really a cool talk.